Well, Cory, thank you so much for joining us on the You're Not Alone podcast today. Geez, easy for me to say. I was really looking forward to bringing you on the show today, and you really got me thinking when we previously talked about identity and flow and so many other things that I think people in life are trying to achieve. And I think that you have some really valuable insights, some things that you're doing to serve your community. And so I wanted to bring you on to talk about that today. But before we dive into that, would you give my audience a quick introduction on yourself?
Well, Zach, first and foremost, appreciate you having me, man. Stoked to be here, especially as you're on the road and we're finding time zones, syncing them all up. I know the craziness of it. So I just appreciate you making the time, making this align. I mean, to really describe myself, it's funny. I said before we recorded, I was like, I hate labels. I hate accolades because I like to peel it back, all the layers, and how I would really introduce myself now as a community builder, a connector, and a creator. Those are the three things, the three identities really that I embody and embrace on a daily basis. And it shows up in a ton of different ways, whether that be I'm creating content for the social medias, I'm creating books, as I wrote a book in the past year here, creating a podcast, building community through hosting community events, both virtually and in person, doing retreats, doing just one-off events in the spaces that I'm in, like here in Austin. So that's how I would best introduce myself now. Now, if you asked me that years and years ago, I would have just said, hi, I'm Cory the swimmer. That's me. That's all you need to know about me. And I'm happy that through years of work, I've been able to unpack that and evolve past it.
Definitely. And when I was, we had our previous conversation, and then when I was doing research on you, you had like a reel on Instagram that broke down your story. So you're a former athlete, still an athlete, but just competed at the collegiate level. You were a swimmer, maybe still do a little bit of swimming, I'm not sure. But you sort of, it's a story that I can relate to because it's sort of this, who am I after sports identity crisis? And the same thing happened to me. So like when I was thinking about this conversation and I was thinking about identity, like the word that came to mind for me was lost. And I think oftentimes when we're having the identity crisis or whatever it might be, and I know that you don't like labels, which I think is like transcending past, I think everybody operates out of labels. Like the first one that I'm ad-libbing here, but like I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, I'm a moderate, I'm a Christian, I'm a Muslim, like people operate from different identities, if you will. And that feeling of being lost is really someone trying to figure out what they want to be in life. Like whatever their previous identity was is no longer serving them in the next chapter of their life. Mm-hmm. And I had a pledge brother tell me that life is nothing but a series of chapters back when we were in college. And that has always stuck with me. And I remember I was there myself years ago in 2016, unsure of my path. I knew that I wanted to do something meaningful with my life, but I wasn't really sure how to do it, who I wanted to be, etc. So I'm curious for you, for the person who clicked on this because they're feeling lost, first and foremost, how do you start to become aware of the identities that you have?
I mean, it's a great question. And I think we first and foremost have to backtrack and look at like, why do we crave identities in the first place? Why do we crave labels? And it's because they help us make sense and help us answer that question of who are we when we look at it through that elementary lens of we can only be one thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We talked again off camera. You were like, oh, how did you grow your TikTok audience in the past year? And it was because I started to really identify as a creator. I started to embrace that identity. But at the end of the day, I don't let that be the only thing. So we have to be able to separate between leaning on identities and embracing identities for the fact that when we do so, we then become better at them. Like if I view myself as a runner, I'm going to become a better runner just by nature, right? But I'm not going to limit myself as saying I'm just a runner. I'm going to embrace other workouts as well because I enjoy that too.
Yeah.
And so we have to look at identities through that lens. When we look at identity theory and the evolution of it,
Yeah.
the final evolution really is when we can sit here and say, I can embrace being multiple things. I can embrace multiple identities. And now I'm not dependent on any one of those. So if I'm embracing the fact that I can be a community builder, a creator, a communicator, all of these different things, a connector, when one of those things don't go right, I'm not like all my eggs aren't in that basket. I didn't put it all on red and now I'm out of money. Instead, I'm diversifying who I am. I'm diversifying my self-worth. I'm diversifying my self-love, the compassion, and how I value myself amongst multiple things. So now I'm not dependent on, I'm going to have a good or bad day, whether swimming goes well or does not go well, which that was the stage of how I showed up for a majority of my life. Like life was great when I went a best time.
Yeah.
Can I tell you how many times I went a best time in my life? I could like count them on my hands and just my two hands. It's very few and far between.
Yep.
When you're at that peak level, you really only have 2 opportunities to go a best time in a year. It's like that fall taper meet and then that spring taper meet. Maybe if you're lucky, you do a summer taper meet. That's just the way swimming is structured as a sport. It's not like a sport like a basketball where you could just go out and pop off any given day. Like so much goes into that process. And this is one of the things that I wish I learned more so in that process, looking back, was because I only embodied the identity of a swimmer. And that was the only thing that really I allowed to define myself. I put a lot of weight on how I showed up at that 1 or 2 or 3 meets a year.
Yep.
So much so that if that meet did not go well, it just kind of sent me into this slump of, now you're telling me I have to wait another 5 to 6 months to try again. It sucks. I just put everything I had into this one.
Yep.
And I got good at, just looking at, okay, next race up, next meet up. It is what it is. I'm going to move on. And I'm going to shift my focus to that.
Yeah.
Then what I realized, when there was no longer another meet, like my last race ever, when my hand touched that wall and I saw my time and I was the slowest that I had been in 6 years, it just hit me like a wave of like, what now? There is no next meet. There is no next metric for me to like redeem myself for this performance. And kind of the twisted way that athletes think is like, we're only as good as that last performance. You know what I mean? We're going to just be remembered how we showed up recently. What have we done for you lately, rather than what have you done over the span of this career? And that was how I was feeling for the longest time. Yeah. And I don't think it helped. You talked a little bit about language of identity. Why I'm so keen on using forever athlete versus former is because when I hear the word former, it means a hard contrast, a start and a stop point.
Yeah.
Either we're an athlete or now you're not. And I think that what that does personally is that discredits and almost devalues at that point a majority of your life, a majority of your experience, all these reps that you've gotten, the intangible soft skills that you can then transfer over to other areas of your life. You're now saying, well, they don't really matter. And I learned that, society kind of reinforced that really tenfold for me. When my career ended, original plan was physical therapy school. And so every single physical therapy school that I applied for sent me a rejection letter. And they were basically all along the lines of like, hey, it's really cute that like you swam really fast from point A to point B, but we have this thing called a GPA requirement and you just don't meet it. So like you can go back to a community college and get that up if you really want to do this. Otherwise, like, thank you, next, try again. And I was like, but don't they know who I am? Like I was so good. And it took me forever to like get out of my own head and get out of my own shit really and start to own that and say, you know what? Okay, there is some truth in that. Like I didn't have my grades together. Great. But it doesn't mean I'm worthless. Like I can start to embrace the things that are working for me, double down on those and start to do more of that. And then all of a sudden now it became this expansive door open rather than door shut in my face over and over again.
Yeah. So the thing that comes to mind for me, and I'm sad when I say this because, and I wonder what your thoughts are on this. When you talk about diversifying your identity, that I love that so much on paper. But what say you to the person who has the belief system, well, I want to be great in XYZ. I want to be great at this sport, or I want to be great as an entrepreneur, or I want to be great as an account manager in this job, or I want to be a great lawyer, doctor, or I want to be a great husband or a great father. It seems to me that there's only so much energy that you can put forth in a 24-hour time period. Let's not even in a day. There's only so much that you can give. And some things do, even if you want them to be a part of your identity, have to be put on the back burner, I would assume. But I'm curious, what do you think about that? Because I know people listening, I guess I identify as being an entrepreneur and a mental health advocate, but I also identify as being a husband and a son and a brother and a friend, and trying to balance all of that, and an athlete as well. Former athlete, I guess, is not the term that I'm going to use now. I love that. I'm a forever athlete. Didn't go as far as you did, but still active, playing that pickleball, y'all. That pickleball is blowing up. Let me tell you, pickleball and golf. If you want to be great at something, you have to put a lot of time into it. And when you put a lot of time into something, it seems to me that your identity would start to form around it. But I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, it's a slippery slope, right? Like, how much time is too much time?
Yeah.
And at some point, we do see diminishing returns on it. Like, there's no way around it. I was actually posed this the other day. Someone was like, if you look at the Tiger Woods, you look at the Michael Jordans, Michael Phelpses of the world, undisputed GOATs in their respective sports. Some you might even be able to argue greatest of all time, and sports in general. You look at their careers, and the question I was posed was, would you take it if, and only if, you got everything that came with it? Like, could Tiger be Tiger without all the scandals? Could Phelps be Phelps without all of the, media press, the press releases and everything that's come with it?
Right.
And I don't know if the answer is yes. So when we're looking at it, like, to truly be the best of the best at what you do, we haven't seen a case study that has proven otherwise.
Right.
However, what I would argue is, just like sports, to your point of balance, I don't think balance is the right word.
Okay.
I prefer the word harmony in this case, because we can start to look at how can we set up our life for more harmony? How can your role as a husband and son and brother harmonize with entrepreneur, speaker, podcast host, and all these other things?
Right.
So make no mistake about it. Like, when you're early stages, especially of these kind of labels and careers and identities, it's going to take a season of putting in reps, putting in time. There's no way around that. You know what I mean? Like, Malcolm Gladwell, 10,000 hour rule has been proven over and over again. Now, it can be intentional practice, it can be intentional focus. And now the conversation changes a little bit, that when you are really intentional with how you're spending your time, you're maximizing it. You're able to find flow more likely when you are being intentional with how you're spending that time. And that might be the point where, okay, great. Now you can lessen the quote unquote the quantity of hours towards it, and you're focused more on quality. But I don't think balance exists, much like when we go through sports seasons, right? And you have the off season, you have the preseason, you have in season, you have postseason competition. The focus changes during each of those seasons of sport. It's going to be the same thing in your life. Depending on the season of life that you're in, you might have to go hard and go all in on one particular thing. the question becomes, how do you not forget about those other things?
Right.
How do you not forget altogether that you are a husband? You know, what's I don't want to say the bare minimum, but what is the bare minimum that you have to do to show up in that role so that your wife feels like, oh, you're doing a good job at it as well?
Right.
And maybe that's a conversation of like, you guys are coming together and saying, hey, for this next 6 months, like I'm really focused on getting this, and this up off the ground. I'm going to have to be spending more of my time there, but I want to make sure that I'm maximizing the quality time that we have together. How can we do that?
Yeah.
You can start to explore it. But yeah, it is interesting when we talk balance talk, when we're talking buying it in to diversifying who you are and how you view yourself. It's a tricky one. But I would say the value of it is really shown in this example of, if you have only one set of keys to your house, to your car, whatever it may be, you're kind of screwed if you lose them. If you only have one identity and like that's where you derive all of your self-worth and all of your value, you're kind of screwed when you lose that one thing.
Yeah.
That's why the transition can be so hard. When you retire, when you get hurt, you get injured, you get benched because your coach thinks someone else is better than you and they're going to play them over you.
Right.
Why it's so challenging for people our parents' age when they retire after doing the same profession for 40 years. It's why military struggles, you know what I mean? Like that's a lot of the why behind why that transition can be so challenging, is because they've lost the key to access flow. The one thing that they are so familiar and engaged in, they've lost it. So my argument is more so towards, if you can find flow in multiple areas, now you're going to have primary flow activities, which can be your sport, your job, whatever it may be, but not neglecting what we would call your secondary and your tertiary and so on and so forth. Flow activities, things that still bring you that experience, just not the main focus.
So I definitely want to talk about getting into that flow state. I think you bring up a really valid point. I mean, how do you navigate a transition? What is sort of your formula for that?
One, it's taking a step back and looking and allowing space for like a mourning period to occur. Like you are going through a loss. That is a part of you that is now no longer as omnipresent as maybe it once was. And it's okay to recognize that. In fact, you're doing yourself more of a service by sitting in that and embracing it rather than trying to suppress. Okay. The problem that I ran into for so long was I didn't allow myself time to process and even pause and think. I just threw myself into a job that paid me the most money, and the times that I felt discontent, I just threw myself into alcohol and partying. And I felt great because I didn't feel anything. Right. And then what I learned in the long run was like, what you resist persists. So because I kept putting this off and off and off, I was feeling it longer than I had to. So I think the first and foremost formula or step is allowing yourself time to actually process, grieve, play with that emotion that is coming up, unpack it, and recognizing that that is okay. It's normal. It's part of that process. Can I ask a question before you jump into two? I love that what you resist persists. That's like a mantra of my life. So, and the other thing that you brought up is the default to partying. So I noticed that with myself too, right? Early 20s, graduate from out of university, and in a corporate job, I'm going to take the job that pays me the most money, that seems like I could have the most growth. And when I'm not working, I'm hanging out with friends and then I'm partying. Mm-hmm. But at a certain point, like you said, what you resist persists, and that discontent, it starts to build up. So what I'm curious about is, when somebody is mourning that transition or that loss, what is one piece of do you have a tangible piece of advice of as you're mourning that loss and you're trying to process through it, here is something that you can do to process it? Yeah, I mean, one of the most powerful things I always suggest everyone should go through is write out their story up until this point in time. And obviously that's something that you can do multiple times because you're always evolving and time is always ticking, right?
Yes. Oh yeah.
Unless you're like me and you're wearing a broken watch right now and it's just for
I
show.
like it though. Watch looks good though.
Thank you. I'm just keeping it on because time's not ticking on that one. But time's always moving forward, right? So in that moment, taking the time to write your story. How did you get to here? How did you get to this point? And then when you look back on it, you can start to look at themes and what really represents you. What are your strengths? What drew you to that thing that you are mourning in the first place? It's where I talk with a lot of athletes to start unpacking how to find the next step, the next career move, the next season of your life. Often starts with looking retrospectively. What drew you into that sport in the first place? The reason why I loved swimming was because it gave me a group of friends. It also gave me the opportunity to be social and antisocial at the same time.
Yeah.
I could talk to my teammates in between reps.
Yep.
But I could 90% of the time put my head down, stare at a black line, and work my butt off for practice. Yep. I loved that. And so once I started to look at that story, I started to see, okay, I'm can be extroverted when I need to be, but for the most part, like I recharge the most and I feel like I fill my cup the most when I'm introverted. I'm gonna start setting up my day so that I actually have some solitude, some alone time. And that's especially tricky when you're living with roommates and this, that, and another thing, right? Like all these other variables, all these other factors. But I just know that about myself now because I took the time to unpack that story and what I did well. I set myself up for success that way. Once someone is writing that story and they've gotten to a point where they feel pretty confident of like, okay, cool. Now I understand like the themes of my life, what I'm good at, what I'm not good at, what drew me into the sport, what drew me away from maybe other sports in their life or other things that they just felt naturally drawn to. It doesn't have to be sport.
Yeah.
Then they can start to identify, well, how can I start to actively seek these things out again? So they shift then into a lens of curiosity.
Yeah.
How can they start to be curious about trying some new things and growing from there? It's foolish to think that one door closes and you immediately find that next passion or that purpose, right? It just doesn't happen that way.
Yeah.
It's like we're expecting love at first sight with the first job that comes across our table, and very rarely is that case. So a reminder I like to give a lot of athletes is like, you didn't fall in love with your sport probably on day one, but you were curious enough to go try it out.
Right.
And then you were curious enough to keep going and keep learning new skills, trying new drills, moving up in groups, whatever it may be, to a point where eventually it became a passion. And then over time, as you stayed curious, passion then becomes purpose. So understanding that formula of curiosity leads to passion, and then curiosity plus passion leads to purpose. But that all takes time. And there really is no timeline. We're so dead set on finding a label, finding an identity at 22, because again, we're looking to define ourselves, to make sense of ourselves right away, that we get so caught up on, I'm 22, I'm lost, I don't have a purpose.
Yeah.
Or I'm whatever age, I just retired, I'm lost, I don't have a purpose. Give yourself some grace in that moment. Allow yourself some space to be curious, go explore some new things, develop some passions, pursue those passions, and maybe over time they intermix, and then you can create this formula to then find purpose down the road. But it's not a like immediate, you find it right now.
I really like that formula, and I picture it with myself at 22, 23 when I did feel very lost and trying to figure out what my purpose was in life. And I didn't realize, of course, at the time that I was mourning something, but you're absolutely right. I was, and I did feel a tension around feeling lost, that it wasn't, because I think it's unsettling when you quote unquote feel lost, and maybe that's a label in and of itself, but when you don't, your sense of the world it's obscured and you don't know, because like you said, I mean, we create these identities to make sense of things. So when you're feeling lost or you don't know what your identity is, it's unsettling, but it's okay. Like, it's okay to sit in that, and it's even better, like you said, to acknowledge it And then you can get introspective and start to think back on your story up until the point that you're in now, and start to look for themes that at one point in time drew out the emotions that we were seeking, which is what you were saying. And then you can start to get curious, which I like to, when I'm working with clients one-on-one, I like to call like the experimental phase. You're just experimenting with different avenues just to see, does this little experiment here, do I feel like, because when you brought up the sports, it's a great example. Like when I played basketball for the first time, it might not have been my biggest passion in the world right then and there, but I was like, oh, I enjoy this. I like this. This is interesting to me. Versus soccer, when I first played it as a kid, it didn't do much for me. And I played a season, and at the end of it, I was just like, nah, not for me, but cool for others. Now, of course, looking back, I'm like, man, soccer is dope. Like, I wish I would have stuck with it, but it just wasn't a popular sport where I grew up back then. So, but yeah, so you get curious, you go into it. To the person who's, trying to figure out their identity right now, to your point, you get curious, and through being open to and being accepting of the fact that you're just in an experimental phase, you can start to carve out little passions. And if you stick with it long enough, to your point, the curiosity paired with the passion can then unlock purpose.
100%. I mean, I think this is really critical. You had me thinking as you were talking about getting lost. Have you ever been in a car where maybe a family member is driving and they're totally lost, but they won't admit it? They're too prideful.
It's very frustrating.
So frustrating, but that is us. That's us at 22, 23.
Oh,
We are lost, and we're actually doing more harm than good than if we were to just pause, admit that we're lost, and then kind of not accept it, but allow it to happen, because the first thing to getting found and finding a step forward, another path, is kind of admitting to yourself that, hey, I am not where I want to be. Okay, I can control what I do from here. Instead of, oh, I'm fine, I'm not lost, keep looking at the map. It's like, no, dude, you're very clearly lost. Like, just pause for a second. We are so adverse to pausing as humans. And I think our population as a whole there's this external pressure. I mean, I felt it. I'm a recovering perfectionist. For the longest time, I was always looked at as the dude who always had it figured out. And I think a lot of athletes can relate to that.
Oh, yeah.
From age 9 onwards, my goal was swim for the Team USA in the Olympics, get us D1 scholarship. And like that path was laid out. And then the second path was physical therapy school. And so when both of those ended for me at the first time, it was like someone took my GPS away. And now I'm in downtown Manhattan trying to figure out, where do I go from here? I don't know. This is so overwhelming. There's so many different options. Whereas if I just were to sit and say, okay, I don't know where I'm at, but I recognize that there's a Starbucks on this corner, which doesn't really help, I guess, in a larger city, but there's this on that corner, and I can start to figure out where I actually am, the landmarks of where I'm at. And then I can we have Google, we have social media, we have all these resources at our hands. We can start to search, well, where do I want to go? What does that look like? Oh, I see what Zach and Cory are doing in the podcasting space. Okay, I want to be a creator. How do I start with that? Well, there's social media now. I can send those guys a message and say, hey, I would love to, you just know, where did you start? Or the best thing that I can recommend to people, especially who are looking to get into social media as a career, or using that to leverage their career, whatever, go back to some of your favorite creators' page and scroll all the way back to like where they first started. And then you get a true feel of where they started, where they were at. And it will be probably very similar to where you're currently at. And that should boost your confidence tenfold, because you're like, wow, if the Devin LeVakes of the world had started here, I think I can start there as well. We get so really stuck when we're in this comparison game of social media in particular, because when we're on our level 0, it's set up in a way that we're only seeing my level 100. We're seeing your level 200, whatever it may be. It's like I have 800 something posts on Instagram on this page alone at this point.
Yeah.
no wonder you're going to feel, if you're not a creator and you've never created content, no wonder you're going to feel like my stuff is superior to yours. I have 800 more reps under my belt. Go look at my rep 1. Go look at my rep 2. I leave all that stuff up there for that exact reason. If you want a real laugh, like go back and look at the first few posts on my page. It's like shirtless mirror picture. It's a really shitty, like filtered picture of my food because I wanted to be a fitness influencer. And that's where I thought I needed to start. And then it evolved with time. And I was like, I want to provide a deeper message. But I know that was kind of long-winded. But that's kind of, if you find yourself lost, accept it. Once you recognize that, then start to build your own map. You can do so by networking and looking up to people you want to model after, or mentors, or whatever it may be. But make sure you're doing it like at your current level, not looking at it as like, oh, I'm here comparing myself to this top level.
I mean, what you're talking about is the process. And
I try to be very tangible with what I give people instead of keeping these like abstract concepts, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And I'm all about the tangible. And I think that that's super important. And it is, I mean, exactly what you described but the process never stops. And like, that's the thing is, we were joking about this beforehand, but like in 2016, all I wanted to do was be able to say that I do what I do now full time. And now I'm doing that full time, and I'm in my process of even going past that. And so it's like, once you start to realize that, you realize that this whole game of life you're just in your process. And if you start to look at it as that versus I have to know the end goal, I have to know the end product, I have to know exactly what I'm doing at every moment of this, but instead sort of embracing the uncertainty of the whole thing, it does, from my personal experience, become a lot easier for me. Transitioning from I need to be this, I need to be that, to I'm just in my process, that's all that this is, has helped me tremendously. And I really didn't, for people listening, like, I've been lost in my early 20s. Like, I know what that feels like. And I didn't feel like I embraced falling in love with the process until really, like, if I'm being really honest, 30. And I'm 31, where I wanted to embrace the process. I was in my process. I was still showing up and doing all of the things, but it's like it hadn't completely sunk in that like that's all that this is. And I think once I reached certain benchmarks in my business, I realized, oh, you're always going to be chasing if you don't realize that this is just a process. So that was a bit of a tangent, but I just wanted to add that layer on to the tangible examples that you were giving, because I think, man, I just wish somebody would have pulled me to the side and been like, I know that this isn't going to make a lot of sense right now. You're 22 years old. You want to have all the answers. You're feeling lost and it's unsettling and you don't like that feeling. Embrace that feeling. To what Cory said, embrace it. Don't numb yourself out. I think it's really easy to go to I don't know what I want to do. I'm just going to party, because that way I don't have to think about it. Not saying that you don't socialize and have fun. And if you want to party a little bit, by all means. But like, if that becomes the main avenue, I think that, Cory, to your point, people will stay stuck. And then getting curious, that in a sense, getting curious is just getting curious about the process, falling in love with that idea. You did say that you had like a part 2. That was part 1, which was like mourning the transition, mourning the loss, getting curious, reflecting on your life story up until that point to see if you could identify any themes, and that starts to equal your purpose. But what was that step 2?
That step 2 was the curiosity. Slipped it in there on you.
Perfect.
But it is taking that next step, right? Like, awareness is fantastic, but it actually sucks if we just have awareness. We don't actually do anything with it.
Right.
We're just furthering that gap. So I think another tangible takeaway that I like to tell people, right? Like, our happiness is directly correlated to our expectation and how close that is to our reality. If our expectation is that we are a $1 million keynote speaker, get, whatever. But our reality is that we're getting $100 per speaking engagement. We're going to feel not that happy with how we're showing up, right? We can still aspire to be $1 million keynote speaker or whatever that may be. That's different than expectation. But how you view yourself has to be similar or close to your reality, because that is where happiness lies. So if you embrace being a beginner, if you embrace learning new things, and recognizing too, because of your past experiences, because you wrote out that past story and identified where you were and where you came from and your strengths and what makes you, your secret sauce, you start to recognize, well, you might be a beginner on paper. You got a leg up on a lot of other people because a lot of other people don't do that.
Yeah.
So doing that then allows you to say, okay, might be a beginner at this. I might have never done this job before or this role or whatever it may be, but I've done something similar. I want to try using that in a way that allows me to then accelerate my growth here. It's like, why do some people pick up sports way faster than other people? They have a shorter, we can shorten that learning curve when you start to identify underlying strengths there and embracing that beginner role. And embracing that beginner role helps shift that expectation towards that reality. It's really, really hard for the more successful the athlete or the more successful the person, individual is, why it is oftentimes so challenging to shift out is because they just went from being number one in the world or top 100 in the world in their respective thing to now no one really knows about them. And they're not great at what they're doing.
Yep.
And so it's like they jumped off this cliff and now they're at the bottom and they're looking back up the cliff being like, I would do anything to be just back up there. It felt great up there.
Yep.
Like, yeah, but you're not there. So shift the expectation, embrace being a beginner. And now you set those goals accordingly. You embrace that process and you start to realize like you become a champion. You become what you want to become by making the decision today to be that. And then the result is a byproduct of that. It's not dependent. Like confidence isn't dependent on an outcome. Confidence is a decision and a choice that you get to make every single day. And if you can embrace that and embody that, I guarantee you're going to be more confident than if you were to just sit here and say, well, when I win that medal or when I get that promotion, I'll be confident. It's like, no, confident people get the medal. Confident people get the promotion. Be confident now. Make that active choice. Be intentional with how you spend your time. Let that run your to-do list, your actions of the day, and then watch those things just kind of organically come to you. That's how you manifest, by the way. That's what they don't tell you. Most people think manifesting is just, I'm going to sit here with my eyes closed. I'm going to say, I'm going to get this, that, and another thing, but they don't actually do anything. Like, cool. You can have affirmations. You can tell yourself you're confident. Let that then drive your actions.
Right.
Don't let them just be hollow words that you say to yourself in the mirror and never do anything with them.
Definitely. I mean, I completely agree with that. I think that was why my wife had such a big issue with the book, The Secret, because she was like, yeah, these mentalities are fine, but there's no action behind them. And that doesn't, it's been a while since I've read the book. So don't get offended, y'all. If you like The Secret, I enjoyed it as well. I'm just saying, I can't remember it perfectly, but I do feel that there was maybe a sense of the action missing behind it. But it's the little steps forward every day or every week. It's not every day is a step forward. You can try, but its paths aren't linear. When you were, you reminded me a lot about the expectation. That was such a good point. I think early on as an entrepreneur, I noticed that I kept getting mad at myself every time I would learn something new. And it was because my expectation was like, how did you not already know this? Like, you're an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs know these things. And what you're talking about is falling in love, again, with getting curious and being okay with, okay, I'm a beginner. I don't know what I don't know. I just know that this is the path that I want to go down, but as I'm going down this path, I need to open myself to the idea that there's a lot that I'm not going to know, and I should embrace that, so that when I do discover something, rather than being hard on myself or down on myself, I'm actually excited about it. I made a discovery. I was in my process, I was committed to this, and through that, commitment, I learned something new, whatever that might be, in terms of obviously everybody's path is different, but I noticed that happening for myself. So I think the call out on expectation, I think a lot of young adults, 22, 23, the expectation is, I need to have everything figured out in my life. And because, to your exact point, their expectation doesn't match their reality, it creates this extreme discomfort and this extreme frustration. And while I do understand that sometimes that friction can create action, it's not a healthy place to operate from 24/7. And I think that that's what you're talking about. It's fine to acknowledge, because without the acknowledgement, like you said, the GPS system, you're never going to get on that path if you don't acknowledge it. So I think that irritation, frustration feeling is there for a reason, to get your attention. But after you've acknowledged it, the next step, and this is what you're talking about, is I think it's transitioning to a healthier mindset to help you begin to navigate that process. Because, like, I was talking to my wife about this, we're going to have kids in the next couple of years. That is going to be a big transition. I don't know what that looks like. But if I go into it feeling like I need to have all the answers, I think I'm going to make myself a lot more miserable than just going into it saying, I'm open to this process. My bigger point being, every time you figure something out, there's another transition. There's another thing that takes place. And so it took me all of my 20s. That's why I'm like doubling down on this. It took me all of my 20s to realize that like your 20s are such a big transitional time period. And unless you cultivate that healthy mindset of curiosity, like you said, and getting into the process and just falling in love with that, you will, in my opinion, make yourself more miserable than is necessary. And that was honestly one of my biggest takeaways from my 20s. The other thing real quick that I want to mention, you were talking about distilling down like your skill sets. That an athlete, using the athlete example, can get a lot better at a sport than maybe somebody else who just doesn't have those natural skill sets. And Jay Shetty talks about this in his book, but your dharma or your purpose is passion plus skill set plus usefulness to the world. And like literally when I look at my life, that equation, and why I think I have a deep sense of purpose, is because I'm passionate about the topic, mental health and helping people. My skill set is public speaking, and I mean that's really my core is my core skill set. So I've combined, the gift of gab, if you will, skill set with passion, and then the usefulness to the world is trying to distill down concepts to give to younger, my podcast is focused on 18 to 24-year-olds. Give them mindset tools, skills that they can use to navigate their 20s. So in a sense, it's like I've covered every part of the dharma equation or the purpose equation. So I thought that was a really good point that you brought up, that sometimes uncovering what you're good at, what your skills are, and then trying to find paths that align with those skills.
Yeah. I mean, I always like to say, as an athlete, I love to home game. I love to play to my strengths. The best advice my dad ever gave me, I'll never forget it. We're sitting in the car. I'm 14 years old, going to Junior Olympics, which sounds like a way bigger deal of a meet than it is. Going to Junior Olympics. It's pretty cool. And I'm getting ready to swim the 1,000 freestyle. And he just turns to me and he goes, whatever you do tonight, I want you to swim your own race. And that was kind of like the secret to getting good at distance swimming. Is everyone swims that 1,000 or the mile or even the 500 or my main events, they all swim it differently. Yeah. So the key is to never get too caught up on any one point of that race. And sure enough, what happened in that race in particular was I happened to be in one of the middle lanes, and I dive in, and the dude next to me just takes off at a pace that was quite honestly like terrifying for a distance race. I was like, this dude, what is this dude doing? And in my head, it took everything in me to say, let him go and do his thing. That's not how you swim this. You swim this by continually pacing throughout, and you get stronger as the race goes. If this dude wants to go out balls to the wall the first bit and beat you that way, great. More power to him. It's going to really hurt for him coming home. And like I had the confidence in my own self to say, I'll be able to reel this dude in on the back end. And sure enough, I was able to. I was able to win that race. And it just really stuck out to me because I had every reason to not swim my own race. And oftentimes we go through life and we have these opportunities to not play to our strengths and to play to the other person's rules or games, when we'd be so much better off just staying within our wheelhouse. Not saying we don't have to get uncomfortable, and we should get uncomfortable at certain points, right? But play to our strengths, play to a game that we know how to do well. I know personally, like when I do public speaking events, I do well. My strength is to make it very interactive with the audience. I want it to be more tangible, hands-on workshop rather than me sitting on this front of the stage and giving a true keynote speech for 45 minutes. I know that's not me. That might work for you. That might work for some other keynote speakers, but that's my secret sauce. That's what makes me me. So I'm going to be better served playing to that than for me to show up and try to be you or someone else. I think that's important for people to recognize as well. Like, you have a uniqueness and that's your superpower. Play to that. Swim your own race and see what happens on the back end of that.
Oh, you've got me beaming ear to ear, because that's so hype, because we live in a world now where, and geez, I remember feeling the pull. 2020, March hits, and boom, if you look at the S&P 500, right, there's this huge dip, and all my friends are calling me, I'm putting money into the stock market. You know, everything's on sale, Zach. Go. It's a 30% off sale. Get your money in there. I needed every dollar I had. I had just gotten laid off from my job, and I had decided I'd been building this business up on the side from 2018 to 2020, and I got laid off, and it was like, okay, here we go. Time to go full time, and I needed cash on hand. So it's just one small example of everyone was throwing their money into the stock. Everyone was calling me saying this, and I had to swim my own race. And I had to say, that's not where my priorities are. That's not what's important to me. And don't get me wrong, to people listening, I mean, there were days where I was like, man, I really feel like I'm missing out, you know? And I've felt like I'm missing out before. I've seen relating it to your early 20s, but that is an early 20 example, right? Maybe all of your friends are throwing their money into the stock market. They got a little bit of coin now. They're in a new job, and that's not your path. You're saving up money on the side to start your own passion, or you're getting ready to buy your first investment property, or you're saving for a really important trip to this country that you've always wanted to go to experience. And you have to decide what race you want to run. And so, Cory, I think that's such a valuable point. How does somebody start to identify those skills? How do they get clear on what they're good at?
On what they're good at?
Yeah.
They just hit me up. No.
Just send Cory a DM, y'all. He will walk you through the process.
I think that's why I say, like, write out your story, write out where you've been, because you can then look at where have you been. I often like to look at it through the times of, you know, if you could distill that and make it a little bit more clear and concise, maybe the top 3 or 5 times you've really faced adversity in your life. How did you get through it? What did you lean on in those moments? That will truly highlight your strengths. I think another way that you can look at it is think of an activity or an action that when you just think about it or you start to speak about it, the tone of your voice changes. You naturally find yourself getting excited and getting worked up about it. That's a strength. things where to other people, they might feel like, oh my God, that's crazy. That's really hard work. But for you, it comes really naturally, really easily. That's a strength. If you have trouble identifying that, like reach out to 5 people that know you really well, shoot them a message and say, hey, I'm doing this thing. I'm trying to figure out my strengths. When you think of me, what do you think I'm naturally really good at? And they'll say this, this, and this. You're going to be like, wow, I didn't even think about that, but thanks.
Yes.
That's the power of that exercise. And I think other things you can look at just, like when you have a state change, when your actual physical body changes and you feel energized, you don't need to feel motivated to go do it. You just go and do it. That's a strength. Those are some great starting points. And then it's important to you have to be able to distill between the attribute and the action. It's what is that underlying attribute that drives that action? And then that's when you become oh, now I found this. Now I can apply it here. You know what I mean?
What do you mean by attribute?
So for example, I really thrive when my day is balanced between some extrovertedness, some stuff like this, where I'm coming on and speaking to you or working with clients. But I find that there's a quick point of diminishing returns after some time of, if I have too many calls back to back, or I see too many clients in any given day, I'm just exhausted. It doesn't mean that I can't do it. I still can. I can power through it if I need to. But if I do that every single day, I'm kind of running on an empty battery sooner rather than later. So I recognize that the activity, while it might be, I get lit up by coaching, I get lit up by podcasting, I find flow in that. The attribute that exists there is, one, helping problem solve with people, finding solutions to their puzzles that they're looking to solve. And 2, another attribute, hidden attribute for me there, is recognizing that I need some time to recharge to myself, where I can turn my actual analytical thinking brain off and do things that are a little bit less thinking, like throw on garbage television for an episode and just let my brain veg out to it for a minute. And that's okay too. So that's what I mean, trying to separate the attribute from the action, because the attribute is the piece that allows you to apply it to multiple areas and not just one area, so to speak.
Definitely. Which, I mean, and it helps you know yourself at a deeper level too, which I think is really, really important. The piece of advice that you gave around asking 5 people, just, hey, what are my strengths? That is the exact reason I am in this career path now. I was 23 or 24. I just joined this speaking organization called Toastmasters, and that started because somebody at work saw me give a work presentation, and they were like, holy crap, how long did it take for you to prepare for that? You crushed that. And I, in the back of my head, I'm like, I took 30 minutes earlier today to just get my thoughts organized and blah, blah, blah. And then that led to me going to Toastmasters and winning this, it's what they call table topics. And it was you stand up there for 30 seconds to 2 minutes, and they just give you a topic and you ad lib on it. You just flow on it. And, there's probably 20 people in the club, not a lot of people, but 3 of us went. And I, first time there, got the table topics for that night. And I went back again and I won again. And then I invited a buddy to come to table topics or to Toastmasters with me, and he saw me speak. And the very next day, scheduled a lunch. I'll never forget it. I drove over to he was working at another technology company, and I drove over to his work to have lunch with him. And the whole purpose of the lunch was for him to tell me that he thought I was a really good speaker. So I bring up the whole point of saying it's all these little breadcrumbs, but it's the exact advice that you just gave, which is if you're unsure, start to open your ears up to what people are saying you're good at, or directly go to the source and ask. Because I think that is a part of how you can start to sort through your identity moving forward. So I thought that was a really great, tangible piece of advice. And literally the whole reason why I'm in this career now a decade later, which is a testament to what you were talking about earlier, the process, getting curious, finding passion in it.
Yeah, I was about to say, you started off going to Toastmasters. You didn't start off, or like it started off, I guess, with the work presentation in the first place, right? It didn't start off with you.
You can track it back even further than that, not to cut you off, but once you really start to look at the breadcrumbs, you're like, it goes so far back. It's
almost like you have that aha moment and you're like, why didn't I do this sooner? Like this would have made so much more sense. It would have saved myself so much trouble. Yep. But you kind of got to go through all of that whole process. Cause I mean, there's pain in process sometimes, but it's through that pain that you can find purpose in the long run. So as much as like people ask me about my story a lot, and I'm like, I wouldn't change anything. I wouldn't swap any of my experience up until this point. I wouldn't go back and change it because it all had value. It all taught me lessons that show up for me today, and they make for some pretty darn good stories that allow me to come on shows like this or do whatever, you know?
They definitely do. And I appreciate you coming on. I got so caught up in the process of this podcast interview that I realized that we're up here at the hour. So, to sort of recap, and then I want to throw the ball in your court one final time. I know we didn't get to talk much about flow, but I think we doubled down on identity, and I think that might be helpful. So sort of recap, if someone's feeling lost right now, first thing is you're in a transition, more than likely. Embrace the fact that you're in a transition. It's okay that you're feeling lost. You are, in a sense, you're mourning the death of a previous life, and you're starting a new chapter, and that there should be some growing pains that come along with that. Try to avoid just diving headfirst into just partying to numb yourself out, because it doesn't allow you to acknowledge and then go on that journey. And then get really curious. Start to get curious, fall in love with that process, and start to try out a lot of different things to see what sticks, because more than likely what sticks is what's going to become a part of your journey moving forward. Is there anything else from navigating identity that you would add?
I think that about covers it. It's a complex topic, right? But if we can distill it down to something like that, that's a great starting point. Trying things, embracing that identity really then helps you evolve in it. And when you start to put your focus towards something, your energy starts to flow to it, and naturally you're gonna get better at it, right? It's like a lot of people come to me now and they're like, why am I not good at X? Or we'll use social media as an example. Like, why is my social media not like getting the traction? Like, well, how much time and energy are you putting towards it? I'm putting like an hour a week towards it. I'm like, okay, well, that's probably why. You know what I mean? Like, do you view yourself as a creator? Oh, no, I'm not a creator. I'm this and this. I'm a coach. I'm like, okay, cool. You can be a coach, but you can also be a creator. Like, you can be both. And in fact, you need to be both in today's day and world. If you're relying on social media to be a lead source for you or whatever it may be, you need to be a creator as well, because otherwise no one's going to be drawn towards your stuff. You're going to be like that weirdo that is always DMing people out of the blue, being like, hey, do you want to work with me? Like, do you need coaching?
Yeah, that doesn't work.
Who are you, dude? Like, and what's sad is it works just enough of the time that people stay doing it.
Yeah.
But it's like banging your head against the wall just for like every 100th or 150th person to like say yes to it.
Yeah.
And you're like, that's not what it's about. If you can embrace being a tangent a little bit there, but we could go down that whole rabbit hole of how I feel about the coaching industry and social media and how they show up there, but we won't. All that to say, like, embrace an identity. Understand that doesn't have to mean that that's all of who you are, but embracing it opens up doors for you to then get better and improve in that space. And I know you said we didn't really touch on flow, but we really did. That was kind of like the whole process of you starting to get clear on who you are is the process of starting to find flow. And just to like give an example, flow is when you're doing the hard work and it feels easy. It's when time stands still. You're just locked in on this present moment. Nothing else matters in the world. Athletes are really familiar with it when they're like in the zone, so to speak. Basketball players, it's like you're on fire, an NBA jam. You can't miss. That's flow. What I was fascinated in learning over the past few years is that you can recreate flow in any arena of your life. It's not limited to the arena of the basketball court or the swimming pool or sport as a whole. You can find it in public speaking. You can find it in work. You can find it in relationships. You can find it at home, on the road, wherever you may be. It's not limited to just one space. You just have to know where to look. And oftentimes knowing where to look begins with getting curious. Curiosity, passion, and purpose, that formula in itself, that's a flow trigger. There's 22 of them. That's a whole nother hour conversation. So if anyone has questions on that, like just shoot me a note and I can nerd out all day.
Love that. Well, I think that that's such a good point too, that is the formula to get you into flow. And I think that that's a really good point. So I appreciate you saying that. Let me give you the opportunity to plug a few things here. What is Forever Athlete and what is Away Game?
Yeah. So great question. Forever Athlete as a whole is a wellness company that is focusing the athlete experience at the center of really community, coaching, and content. So think of if Netflix met a social media, but it was all geared towards former athletes, that's what that space is designed for. And that's our social club. Within that, you can find access to a whole bunch of trainings. We got everything from like how to find motivation again, how to find your true strengths, a whole, 6-day course on those topics alone. And then there's the social element where it shows you other athletes in your area and inspires you to connect with them through specific events. So it's not weird. It's not awkward. It's very natural, free flowing, saying, hey, look, you guys have this shared experience, come together and become friends, essentially. Because no one teaches you how to make friends as an adult. So I'm trying to change just that. And then what Away Games is it's this do-over for athletes that traveled their whole life that never got to actually experience the culture of certain cities. So we got one coming up in March in San Diego. The premise there is come to San Diego. We'll do a hybrid of personal development workshops. There'll be a live podcast that I host. And then there'll be really this food tour throughout. We're doing different cultural things like going for various hikes, working out at different gyms there, really trying to do the local experience, not the touristy stuff that you would do if you visit any city. We don't have time for that. You can go do it on your own. We're really focused on giving you a feel of immersing yourself in that culture, with the point being, like, if you find yourself back in that city ever again, you've made connections, you know where to go, and now it becomes fun to travel. Like, I love traveling now because I oftentimes don't stay in hotel rooms. I'm staying with friends that I've met through social media. Yeah. And I'm just like crashing on their couches or their spare bedrooms or whatever it may be. But I'm getting local homemade meals. It's like the stuff that you just don't get if you travel normally, right? Yeah. So it's helping people recreate that.
That's really cool, man. I was genuinely curious about Away Game, and that sounds like a really fun, cool. Is it like a weekend long type of deal? Is it? Yeah,
it's 4 days. Well, like technically 2 full days and 2 half days. 4 days in total. People arrive on Thursday. Typically, we'll check into the headquarters, the Airbnb, and then from there we'll go through a little bit of programming Thursday night. Usually a welcome dinner, icebreaker, like get to know each other kind of thing. I kind of hate the word icebreaker because I often think it's done poorly, so it feels awkward. Yeah, I've yet to have an Away Game where people have felt really awkward and uncomfortable from the beginning, knock on wood. Yeah, I think that's just goes to show with the intentionality that I'm putting behind setting up and curating these events and bringing the right people into the room, where people get together and they're like, oh my God, I feel like we've already known each other. Most of the time they have. We've connected with a pre-call with everyone that's coming for that weekend already virtually. So it's not like they're meeting someone for the first time. Right. We've had some digital interaction. And then, we'll go through Friday, full day of programming, Saturday, full day of programming, and then Sunday. The real fun part that most people don't realize is it's all one big neuroscience experiment that I run. It's all based off of what's called the flow cycle, which is a 4-stage cycle that induces flow and encourages flow. And in doing so, we're able to get 3 to 4 flow cycles a day. And that's like what makes true bonding memory, like memorable moments. And that's the secret sauce. So if anyone wants to steal it, go for it. But that's the why of people having such a transformational experience at these, or they get to the end of the day and they're like, wow, we did a lot today. I feel tired, but I don't feel exhausted.
Yeah.
I feel like I did just the right amount. I was like, yeah.
That was
That's
intentional.
It. Yeah, it's all intentional.
I like that. That's awesome.
I was sitting at the first one with my videographer, and we were just talking one night, and he was like, dude, I like how like laid back, laissez-faire you are with the itinerary. And I was like, oh, let me tell you how intentional all of that is. And he was like, his mind was blown when I broke it all down. It's like, wow, that's crazy. I never thought of it. And I was like, yeah, man, trust me, I thought of everything.
I love
except
that.
for pens. That's the one thing I always forget. So I'm gonna remember this next go around to bring pens.
Yeah. So if y'all are coming to the event, just don't forget any pens, because
bring your own pen. Actually.
Yeah, bring your own pen.
Make my life easier.
That's really cool, man. That sounds like a really fun event, and San Diego's a cool town. So just an hour and a half south of me. So it's, who knows if I'm around. I don't know what the dates are, but
March 9th through the 12th.
March 9th through the 12th. Okay. I'll have to take a look at the old calendar and see what the deal is there. So what about this? Where can people find you and stay connected?
Yeah, man. First and foremost, I just want to say thank you for having me. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I found some flow in it. So I appreciate the space. And anyone who's listening in wants to find more of what I do, Instagram is at Cory Camp, TikTok's Forever Athlete. And then our website is foreverathletesocialclub.com. That's where you can find that Netflix/social media hybrid that we've created, and learn more about away games and all that fun stuff.
Really cool, man. So just to conclude this episode, what is one piece of advice that you would give to somebody who's looking to get on their mental health journey?
Well, I love the name of the show, that you aren't alone in that journey. And I think the number one piece of advice, you're looking to get started, offer yourself some grace. Like, you have no control over being in this spot right now, being dealt the cards that you were dealt. Let's acknowledge that. Give yourself some grace in that space. And then from there, though, you can make a conscious decision to choose otherwise and start to take action one thing at a time. I had a conversation with a client earlier today. And we were like, yeah, like when you're depressed, when you're over anxious or whatever it may be, when you're in that lowest of low, it's oftentimes poor advice to say, well, just like open up the blinds, get outside, go for a walk. That's not meeting yourself where you're at. It's okay to give yourself grace, meet yourself with compassion, and truly meet yourself where you're at, and identify like, what is the one thing you can do? Maybe it's just taking the clothes on your floor and putting it in the hamper. Maybe that's the win for the day. And then just start to stack the wins from there. It's a journey. It's not a quick fix. It's not a wave a magic wand. It's not pop a pill and all of a sudden you're healed. So embrace that journey. Take it one step at a time, but it starts with meeting yourself at step one.
Which in a lot of ways I feel has been the theme of this podcast.
Heck yeah. We did a good job with that, huh?
We did, man. Way to bring it full circle. Meet yourself where you're at. Have that acknowledgement. Show yourself some grace, and then take that first small step. I think that's beautiful, man. And I think that's a great place to wrap up the episode. I really appreciate you coming on, Cory, and talking identity. Definitely going to have to bring you on for more conversations in the future.
I wouldn't hate that.
Right on, brother. I appreciate you coming on.